These days, companies like Hasbro put out so many toys, it's rare that one becomes a valuable collectible. It wasn't always like that, and when the company was putting out action figures for its G.I Joe lines, there were more than a few, which became uncommon or even rare. Do you remember the late 80s G.I Joe craze? If you are under 30, your most prominent associations with G.I Joe might be Channing Tatum or The Rock. Here, in this video, we are going to show you how G.I Joe got started and how the action figure maintained its relevance for half a century. In the early 1960s, there were no male toy figures popular with boys. Of course, there was Barbie's +1 Ken, which was mostly popular with girls. But this Ken toy was really all hair gel and no muscles, so the boys were not at all interested in Ken. At that time, inventor Stan Weston approached Hasbro in 1962 with an idea for a 12-inch military figure for boys. But the company turned him down. Hasbro CEO Merrill Hassenfeld just wasn't interested and told his employees they were not in the doll business. They were obviously making toys, but they were not getting any profit from them. But Don Levine, the head of research and development, saw the toy's potential. When Hassenfeld went on vacation, Levine spent 2 weeks creating detailed models of Weston's characters, each wearing replicas of actual military equipment. He showed the models to Hassenfeld when he got back, and Hassenfeld loved them. Hasbro offered Weston either $50,000 and a 1% royalty, or a flat buyout of $100,000. He took the buyout because he didn't know the actual potential of that doll. And later, Don Levine took ownership of the toy as the father of G.I Joe. G.I Joe was officially a go. But first, the toys needed a name and a fitting marketing campaign. They figured out that no boy would want to play with a doll, they needed an action figure. Hasbro introduced government-issue Joe in 1964. The name was inspired by the 1945 film The Story of G.I Joe, starring Robert Mitchum. Of course, an Academy Award-nominated film starring a Western legend is a great way to capitalize on the name and engage customers. By following Barbie's example, Hasbro created multiple characters, a different figure for the 4 branches of the military, with different outfits and plenty of equipment sold separately. The toy was a huge hit, accounting for 2/3 of Hasbro's sales in its first 2 years. But America's continued escalation in the Vietnam War soon brought all too real war images to people's living rooms. Suddenly, war-centric toys were less appealing, at least to the parents holding the purse strings. In order to keep Joe on shelves and at the forefront of the market, he was rebranded as an adventurer, and the toy series was fittingly renamed The Adventures of G.I Joe. His bio was changed to reflect his new ambitions. After an honorable discharge, Joe committed himself to more peaceful action, shifting his attitude radically from warrior to peacenik to mirror the new political climate. Rather than fighting in wars, he joined the counterculture movement and fought ecological disasters and wild animals. And yeah, the strategy worked out as they expected. The sales again started to reach their peak level. And in 1970, G.I Joe was restyled once again, and the line was renamed G.I Joe Adventure Team. And the bio goes from this to Joe was still a tree-hugging world traveler, but now he had lifelike hair, eyes that could shift from side to side, and kung fu grip, which allowed him to actually hold his weapons and grip ropes to climb a mountain or swing from a tree. Pictured on the packaging, illustrations inspired rescue raft or flying missions, firefighting, and even encouraged kids to seek out the abominable snowman. But little did they know that something unexpected was going to happen. The 1973 oil crisis raised the price of an oil barrel 70%, forcing Hasbro to change the way Joe, a petroleum product, was molded. He went from the original body sculpt to a lighter, much less durable and less expensive muscled body. Although Joe now had a six-pack, it was a lot more common for his arm to fall off. As sales plateaued in the middle of the decade, Hasbro tried to add life to the franchise by giving Joe an adversary. 3 years after the oil dilemma, the company unveiled Joe's new foe. The Intruders, strong men from another world. Although they resembled cavemen, they were highly intelligent and strong. The new toys featured a button on their backs that, when pressed, activated crusher grip arms, a new innovation that squeezed their arms together. The Intruders helped sales, but it was not enough to save Joe. He was officially retired from 14 years of service in 1978, with no plans for re-enlistment. Not everyone gave up on Joe, though. Hasbro's senior vice president of international marketing Bob Prupis thought the series still had potential. He started planning a franchise reboot that took cues from the late 60s or early 70s TV series Mission Impossible. Echoing the space toy craze of the late 70s, his futuristic spin on military technology featured science fiction-inspired weaponry such as lasers and jetpacks, alongside realistic tanks, rocket launchers, and submachine guns. But the feedback from the company was negative, so Prupis started over. He knew Joe belonged on store shelves, so first he just had to find the right format. He pulled back on the science fiction elements and asked for the help of colleagues Kirk Bozigian, Ron Rudat, Greg Bernstein, and Steve Diaguano. They decided to start modifying an existing figure to create a new toy. But if the new Joes were to succeed, they needed more than just extra joints. They needed a movie or TV show to draw kids in. The easiest way to do this would have been through commercials, to run little 30-second cartoons that would introduce kids to the reimagined Joe and create storylines to follow. But they had strict limits on the amount of animations. Therefore, Hasbro realized that the solution was to give G.I. Joe its own comic book. The company later approached Marvel Comics, whose editor-in-chief loved the idea and handed it off to a low-level editor, Larry Hama. Hasbro invested $3 million to create a series of 30-second animated commercials for the new Marvel comic book G.I. Joe, a real American hero. If Joe was going to have new cartoons, he needed a new enemy to match. In a meeting with Hasbro, Marvel editor Archie Goodwin came up with the idea for Cobra, a terrorist organization determined to rule the world and obliterate its main enemy, G.I. Joe. Along with adding bad guys, Marvel also suggested that G.I. Joe become the name of the unit, and that the unit comprise specialists, each with their own names and characteristics, which Hama provided. This decision opened up more play opportunities for kids and the potential to make a heck of a lot more money. During the 2 years of pre-production, he created detailed dossiers for each character, including biographical notes, military specialties, and psychological profiles. And at last, the new G.I. Joe was ready. Hasbro anticipated 5,000 orders, but they got a huge order of more than 1,25,000. After a successful year with the figures, a second upgraded series was introduced in 1983. The Joes now had a mid-bicep 360-degree swivel, allowing their arms to turn in toward their bodies for more realistic gunplay and positioning. Like the Kung Fu grip of the 70s, the swivel arm battle grip innovated the toy and gave Hasbro a reason to re-release each original figure with the new feature. The line made $51 million the first year, and well over $100 million in its second. So many figures were produced over the coming 12 years that the Hasbro team started modeling characters after themselves. Rudat became Leatherneck, who was released in 1986, and Bozigian showed up as Law in 1987. Joe's popularity peaked in 1986, but then met unexpected competition in the form of 4 anthropomorphic turtles with a taste for martial arts. Sales soon started sliding, but the real blow came in 1989, when CEO and G.I. Joe champion Stephen Hassenfeld died unexpectedly. 2 years later, Hasbro acquired Kenner, producers of the Star Wars line of action figures, and Joe was overshadowed and outsold. In 1994, the line was discontinued for good. But just because the original design ended, doesn't mean that Joe disappeared altogether. He's been on store shelves in some form or another since 1994, including new figures along with reproductions. This soldier, adventurer won't be wiped out. It's just not in his nature. This soldier, adventurer won't be wiped out. It's just not in his nature. What do you think of this legendary toy model? Let us know your comments below. And that wraps up today's content. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe to our channel.